Greetings, travelers. I know exactly the exciting and high-octane gameplay that you've been looking for. Mahjong Madness. Doman Mahjong is exactly the same as Riichi Mahjong, or Japanese Mahjong, with the only difference being purely aesthetic. What this means is that if you learned how to play Mahjong through the Yakuza franchise, then the rules are exactly the same, which is where I originally learned how to play Mahjong. And since some nerds will show up, Mahjong does refer to many variations of the game, and this version is usually just called Riichi Mahjong, but I might call it just Mahjong anyways. Although for my Western audience, which is only like 99% of you, if you've never played any variation of Mahjong, it can be similar to Rummy if you've ever played that before, since they are derived from the same game historically, according to game scholar David Parlett. At least, that's what I read on Wikipedia. The more you know. Much like many card games, the mechanics are not too hard to get at first, although there is a lot of depth in theory that will make your head spin. This video will give you an overview of game mechanics, a tiny bit of strategy, as well as some common beginner traps. I will try to split it up into chapters because I already know this is going to be long as fuck, but there is a lot of stuff that you don't need to know to just start drawing and discarding tiles with your buddies. So reach a point where you feel like you could do that and then simply stop watching if that's what suits you. And this is when I tell you to support the channel. The first thing that you need to know in order to start your journey is where to unlock Doman Mahjong matchmaking in Final Fantasy XIV, which will first require you to unlock the gold saucer by completing the quest It Could Happen to You, and then you have to find a quest in said gold saucer called Every Little Thing She Does Is Mahjong. And once you do that, you now have Doman Mahjong unlocked. If you're like me and you play on the Aether Data Center, it's probably easier to get a group together to run Delibrum Regine Savage than it is to get 4 people to queue for a game of Mahjong. I've heard rumors that there is a Discord server for Mahjong on this data center, and there probably is, but I already hate typing in chat in the first place, and I have other means to play Mahjong online. Speaking of which, I play on Mahjong Soul occasionally, where the more money you put in for gacha aesthetic garbage, the better your luck is. In this video, I will be using footage from multiple Riichi Mahjong simulators, since some are easier to get a match in than others. That, or I could just level an alt up to 15 on Kujata and probably get into games much easier, but I don't feel like doing that. DC Travel better let me play some Zhong. To start, you might as well know what all the tiles are. There are 3 suits: bamboo, characters, and dots. Don't worry about my terminology here. I'm not trying to have the correct vocabulary. I am just explaining that there are 3 suits with numbers 1 through 9, and there are 4 of each tile. So there are 4 2-dot tiles, and 4 6-character tiles, and so on. These tiles are all exactly the same except for the special red-colored 5 tiles and some variations of Riichi Mahjong, including Doman Mahjong. You don't have to worry about those in terms of being able to form a hand. They are simply worth bonus points if you've managed to score the hand. In addition to all the suited tiles, you also have honor tiles, which are north, south, east, and west wind, as well as red, green, and white dragon, of which once again there are 4 of each tile. So there are 4 green dragon tiles and 4 west wind tiles and so on. That makes up every single possible tile in Mahjong. I'm not cracking too many jokes right now because it can be a little hard to wrap your head around if you've never played before. So what exactly makes a hand? You have 13 tiles in front of you. Each turn you draw a tile and discard one face up in a personal discard pile. A very standard winning hand is formed with 4 sets of 3 and a pair, which comes out to 14 tiles total. This is because the last tile you need in order to score the hand, such as drawing into it on your turn, makes up the 14th tile. These sets of 3 that I refer to are usually called melds. So a proper meld is either 3 of the exact same tile or a run of 3 tiles of the same suit. So having 3 7-dot tiles is a meld, or having 4 5 6 character is also a meld. You might think to yourself and ask, how do you make a run of honor tiles? It's easy. You don't. Honor tiles can only be made into a meld by getting 3 of the exact same tile. I probably don't need to say this, but getting 3 of the same tile is a lot harder to do than forming a run, hence why honor tiles are usually more difficult to build a hand with, and a pair is literally just 2 of the same tile. You only need 1 pair to make a legal hand, but having 2 pairs isn't the worst thing on the planet, which I might explain later if I feel like it. That's enough of the basics for you to at least understand how to start having a chance to get some points. Now we get to explain some more complicated rules. When you first start playing Doman Mahjong, they are going to recommend that you don't steal tiles from other players. This is when I tell you about Yaku, which is how your hand is worth points. If you never steal any tiles while getting to one tile away from winning, known as being Tenpai, you can declare Riichi, which is one of the simplest Yaku to understand, although not necessarily the easiest to form. When you declare Riichi, you bet 1,000 of your points and you let everyone know that you're one tile away from winning. You are also forbidden from making any changes to your hand. You simply draw and discard for the rest of the round. If any player discards the last tile that you need to win, or if you draw into it, you score the hand. If it was a player that discarded the last tile that you needed, you can declare Roan, and you can steal points from that player based on how much your hand is worth. If you draw the last tile that you need, you can declare Tsumo, not to be confused with Sumo, and you will steal points evenly divided among all other players. Now, the reason why Riichi is one of the easiest Yaku to understand is that your hand doesn't need to be anything specific besides the 4 melds in a pair. Well, technically it just needs to be Tenpai, but let's not think about special hands like 7 pairs. Riichi by itself is a Yaku. This is also known as playing a closed hand. If you steal any tiles from players during the round, then you are playing your hand open, and you need to have a Yaku of some kind for it to be worth any points. As an important distinction, declaring Ron does not open your hand, even though you are technically stealing your last tile. Only stealing tiles through Chi, Pon, or Kan is how you open your hand. So what are the other Yaku? Well, there is a complete list that Final Fantasy XIV provides, or you can try to look up a condensed version for what Yaku you can score out of an open hand, but allow me to try to simplify the process. The simplest to identify hands that you can play open are all simples, known as a Tanyao, or a Yaku High. I'll start with Yaku High. Remember those honor tiles that I mentioned previously? If you have, say, 2 green dragons and someone discards the third one, you will have the option to Pon, or steal the tile to make a meld of 3 green dragons. A set of 3 of any dragons is worth 1 Yaku, and you can play the rest of your hand open from that point because you already have value. Just a side note here, if you have 2 dragons and you start calling tiles for other melds while banking on the fact that you will steal the dragon later, that is a very bad play, and you should avoid doing that. It's usually only worth playing open with a Yaku High if you already have the Yaku secure. In a similar vein, if you manage to draw into 3 of the same dragon, that's also just worth 1 Yaku, and you can play open for the rest of your melds, even though your opponents probably don't know that you're sitting on a dragon. Stealing tiles works in 2 ways. Well, technically 3, but let's ignore Kan for now. Pon means stealing the third tile that you need to complete a set of 3 of the same tile. So if you have a pair, you can Pon the third if someone discards it. You can Pon by stealing from any other player. You can also steal tiles to complete a run, which is called Chi. The difference being that you can only Chi off of the player directly before you in turn order. You cannot steal from the other 2 players in order to form a Chi. In the edge case that you try to declare Chi and someone else declares Pon off of the same tile, Pon will beat Chi. Thankfully, any automated Mahjong game will let you know when you can steal a tile and handle all the edge cases for you. The only reason to know the rule for Chi is so that you aren't confused when someone discards a tile that you need to complete a straight and you can't steal it. And since I mentioned Roan earlier, you can declare Roan off of any opponent. It doesn't have anything to do with playing an open hand. Stealing the last tile to win, no matter what it is always a Roan, and it can be stolen from any player. In addition to dragons, 3 wind tiles can be worth a Yaku as well. The difference being that 3 of a dragon is always a Yaku, but 3 of a wind is only sometimes worth a Yaku. The easiest way to identify if a wind is worth anything: first, see if you have a pair of winds. Check the round wind. If the wind that you are looking at is the same as the round wind, then it is worth a Yaku. Check the player that you are. If the wind that you're looking at is the same as your player, then it's worth 1 Yaku to you. As an example, if you are the east wind player, and east wind is also the round wind, then it is worth a Yaku, and it's worth twice as much as usual. All other winds are worth as much as thoughts and prayers after a tragedy. Absolutely nothing. Just like I mentioned before with dragons, don't start calling tiles while betting on the fact that you will get 3 of the wind that you're looking for later. Typically, you will only go for this hand if you are dealt a pair of the same honor tiles in your opening hand, and that pair of honor tiles is either a dragon or the good kind of win, which isn't super uncommon, so it's good to know when you have this as an option. The other simplest to understand open hand is all simples, also known as a Tanyao. This hand is still made by getting 4 melds in a pair, but the only tiles that you can use to make all those melds in the pair are 2 through 8 of each suit and nothing else. Or if it's easier for you to understand another way, make a hand with no honor tiles, no 1s, and no 9s. 1s and 9s are called terminals. It is important to know what terminals refer to. So a Tanyao is a hand with all simples, or you can think of it as a hand with no terminals or honors. Once again, to reiterate, you still need to make the 4 melds, so either 3 of the same tile or 3 in the row, but with this other limitation added on top of it. You can play this hand completely open, so if you have a pair of 3 bamboo, you can steal the 3rd one if someone discards it, or if you have 6 and 7 dots and the player before you discards 8 dots, you can cheat that to get 6, 7, 8 dots or whatever you want. Just keep in mind that if you have something like 7 and 8 bamboo, and you have a chance to steal a 9 bamboo, don't do that or your hand is no longer a Tanyao. Tanyao is one of the easiest hands to make in Riichi Mahjong, and has a reputation to the point where some variations do not allow you to win a round with an open Tanyao. In the case of Final Fantasy XIV Doman Mahjong, that would be the 4-player full match FURITEN disabled mode. However, in ranked Doman Mahjong, Tanyao is always at full power. The last thing to mention about making calls is Kan. Kan is what happens when you have 3 of the same tile and someone discards the 4th. You can declare Kan. This will set aside those 4 tiles and you get to draw an extra tile from the dead wall, unlike the other calls where you simply steal a tile and then discard one. This will also flip over another bonus tile, making more tiles worth more bonus points. Don't worry about that yet, but that's all that Kan does. You can also Kan if you draw into 4 of the same tile yourself. If you do that, you also have the option to Kan on your turn. This is a special type of Kan though, since you didn't steal the tile, it is considered a closed Kan. This makes it so that your hand is still considered closed for the purpose of scoring, even though you set aside the Kan. And you also get to see the bonus tile first before discarding. And lastly, if you declared a pon earlier in the match and you draw the 4th copy of that tile, you can add to the pon that you set aside to turn it into a Kan. Although Kan can be kind of fun, calling open Kan still opens your hand and doesn't guarantee that you will get any closer to scoring. It just makes all the hands that can be scored that round likely to be higher value. The fun facts about Kan though: if you declare a Kan and draw the last tile that you need to score, that's a bonus Yaku. Also, if you declare a Kan by turning one of your pawns into a Kan, and the tile that you use to do that is the tile that someone else needs to win, they can steal it, which is another Yaku known as robbing the Kan. Although for the purpose of making hands, Kans are pretty much treated as 3 of a kind, unless it's something like 4 Kans. I'd probably recommend avoiding Kan when you first start playing. There are many other Yaku that can be formed to make more valuable hands. Some of them can be played open, like all triplets, some of them have to be played closed like Pinfu, and most of the ones that can be played open are worth more points if you play them closed like a full straight. It's just something that you'll memorize over time. Don't get too overwhelmed with all the different types of Yaku because most of them will not occur very often. The most common Yaku that you will see, especially against newer players, are Riichi, Tanyao, Toi Toi, and Yaku High. And most of the time you have to be able to look at your opening hand and determine what's easiest for you to get to. For beginners though, I'd focus on just being able to make a legal hand at all, either by playing closed and going for Riichi, or by playing open and making a hand that has a Yaku of some kind. Many people, including Final Fantasy XIV itself, will recommend new players to never play open-handed, but if you play like this, it's like sitting at the little kids' table while you watch all the adults have fun. So knowing the easiest to identify open hands gives you more options for how to approach the game, which is why I dedicated a whole segment to explaining this entire half of Doman Mahjong. But you also have to remember to avoid FURITEN. Yeah, you didn't think that we had finished talking about legal hands yet, did you? FURITEN is a rule that's in place for a very specific reason. You cannot win off of a tile that you discarded previously during the round. This doesn't usually happen if you're trying to form a hand, but as a shitty example, let's say you have 2 Northwind tiles in your opening hand, and you discard one of them and immediately draw another one. So now you decide to keep those 2 tiles in your hand to either spite the game or some other reason, and now you manage to get the Tenpai, 1 tile away from winning. And you have 3 Melds and 2 pairs in your hand, with one of those pairs being Northwind, and the game says that you are in FURITEN. So you can't have North Wind be one of the last tiles that you need to score the hand since you have one in your discard pile. This will also cockblock you from scoring off of the other tile, no matter what it is. Since you made one of the tiles that you could possibly win on FURITEN, it just absorbs everything around it. Now, is it the end of the world if you are in FURITEN? No, FURITEN only prevents you from declaring Ron. You can still win through Tsumo. You know, just simply draw the last tile that you need to win. But the odds of scoring your hand go way down if you can't declare Ron, obviously. It's usually best to avoid FURITEN if you can. In my shitty example, if that pair of North Wind was your pair in your hand and not one of the tiles that you are waiting on to score, then you can avoid FURITEN altogether. But it is easier to just get that shit out of your hand rather than forcing yourself to play around it. My example is still shitty though, because it's not that common. It's much easier to get yourself into FURITEN by discarding a tile that was part of a straight and you didn't even realize it. So that's always fun. On the flip side though, always remember that if you are playing defense for a hand and you don't want to get roamed by a particular player, any tile that player discards is guaranteed to be safe, which is why this rule exists in the first place. If you make it to the end of a round and nobody managed to score a hand, which happens fairly often, all players who are Tenpai, one tile away from winning, get paid out 3,000 points split among them and paid out evenly by all players who are not Tenpai. If everyone was Tenpai, you all just look at each other and say, oops. There's also a dealer every round, which doesn't mean anything in terms of how players get tiles since it's all automated, but being dealer is still special. All hands that you score are worth 50% more points, and if you win a hand as a dealer, you get to be dealer again next round. A common strategy for dealer is to score a bunch of fast and cheap hands as many times in a row to get as many bonus rounds as you can. Now for some real stuff that you don't technically have to know, here's a basic explanation of scoring. So a hand is worth an amount of Han, which is then converted to points. Everyone starts the game with 25,000 points, and you gain points by scoring hands, or lose points by discarding the last tile that someone needs, Ron, or by opponents drawing their last tile and stealing from everyone else, Tsumo. You will typically see a value for how much a Yaku is worth when looking at all the different Yaku. If your hand meets the requirements for multiple Yaku, you score all the Han added together, so a Tanyao all triplet hand is worth 3 Han. The more Han your hand is worth, the spicier it gets. There are even special names for hands once they score beyond a certain amount of points. The general rule of thumb, the more Han a Yaku is worth, the harder it is to score. This is why even though making a hand with honor tiles is more difficult, making a hand with only honor tiles is a Yakuman, a term for the most amount of points that can be scored in a single hand. In addition to the Yaku, hands also have Dora. Dora are bonus points. Remember when I mentioned those red colored 5 tiles? If you score a hand, you will get 1 bonus Han for each red 5 in that hand. Just note that bonus tiles are scored in addition to your Yaku. You still need to form a hand that has a Yaku in the first place to score the bonus points. Even though the majority of your value in the hand can sometimes be all bonus tiles, it means nothing if you don't have a Yaku. Beyond just the special colored tiles, you will also see a set of bonus tiles on the screen as well. All of those tiles are removed from the wall, and one is flipped over at the beginning. This indicates what tile is Dora. It's always the next tile from whatever is flipped over. So for example, if 2 bamboo is flipped over, then 3 bamboo is worth bonus points. In addition, you also know that there is a 2 bamboo tile that is not in the game. It's usually not hard to figure out what is Dora based on what's flipped over, but the edge cases are number 9. If 9 character is flipped over, then 1 character is Dora, and the other cases are all honor tiles. So for wins, it goes in player order. Keep in mind that you play counterclockwise. So if West Wind is flipped, look to the player counterclockwise from them, so North Wind would be Dora. And for dragons, it's a cycle that goes green, red, white, and then white loops back around to green. So just think greed, but with a silent W at the end. Yeah, you're probably confused by that, but any automatic Mahjong service will just highlight the tile that's Dora, and remember that shiny tile, good. But wait, there's more. You see, there's another hidden bonus tile underneath the Dora indicator. You don't know what that tile is, but if you score a closed hand, you get to score whatever the Ura Dora is. You don't get to score these special secret Dora if you play open-handed. This is one of the reasons why playing closed is generally worth more points. You don't need to know all the specifics, but Uradora is mostly random unless you are getting towards the end of the wall, and you might be able to guess what's in there if you're really good. But remember when I said that you flip over another bonus tile for every con that's declared? Well, that's how you get more Dora tiles and make hands worth more points. Each Dora indicator also adds in another Dora, so if 3 cons have been declared and someone goes for Riichi, their hand is probably worth a fuck ton of points. Although if 4 cons are declared and nobody immediately wins, that results in a stalemate. Since we are here, you can also get a hand abortion, as it's called in Mahjong, from drawing 9 different terminals and honors. This will allow you to redraw the hand and pretend like nothing happens, since that's pretty difficult to play with other than going for 13 orphans. The other condition for redoing a hand is if the first discard of all players is the same wind. The round will also simply restart, and the round will end in a stalemate if every player declares Riichi, or in some variations if all 3 players call Ron on one remaining player. A quick game of Doman Mahjong lasts until every player has been dealer at least once, and the last dealer keeps going until they don't get a bonus round. And a standard game of Mahjong lasts as long as everyone has been dealer at least twice, and the last dealer keeps going until they don't get a bonus round. Note, you can go on for even longer if no player has more than 30,000 points after what would have been the last hand, but that's a technicality and is not worth thinking about. Finally, at the end, whoever has the most points wins the most, and everyone else gets ranked from 2nd through 4th place. Usually when they do a ranked system, getting 1st or 2nd will give you points towards ranking up, and getting 3rd means you don't lose as much as getting last. And that's still not enough information for my satisfaction. I'll just add in one last segment here to explain weights, some real advanced shit, and other stuff that I didn't know where else to fit in. You see, not all hands in Doman Mahjong are created equal. Some are easier to score than others. Remember all the way back when I said that having 2 pairs isn't the worst thing? If you get to Tenpai with 3 melds and 2 pairs, you now have 2 different tiles that you can win on to make either of them into the meld and the other one will be your pair. That weight still kinda sucks though, because at best there are 2 of each tile remaining. A better weight will usually involve already having a pair and 3 melds, and your last meld is a run of 2 tiles with no terminals. So like having 4 and 5 bamboo. That means that you can score off of either a 3 or a 6 bamboo, and you can have possibly up to 4 of each of those tiles remaining. Although if you have something like 3 and 5 bamboo, you're still waiting on only 1 tile. You can go even further though. Say you have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 dots and you get to Tenpai. Well, now you can win off of 2 dots and 8 dots to form 2 melds, but also 5 dots, which is a 3 tile weight. This is something that starts to make more sense the more you play. Just know that the more tiles that you can possibly wait on, the easier it is to get yourself into FURITEN. Also, having a straight of 4 tiles doesn't technically mean anything, but you could end up in a situation where you are Tenpai with a 4 tile run, and you have no pair yet, and now you have 2 possible ways to get a pair. Ideally, you can identify the best weights to go for when getting to Tenpai, but some programs like Mahjong Soul will literally tell you what your weights are going to be and does all the work for you. Also, while having 2 pairs can be okay, once you start getting to 3 pairs, it gets a lot harder to build a hand, because you need at least one of those to become a real meld before getting to Tenpai. Although at 4 pairs, you could start calling things to try to go for Toi Toi, and if you have even more pairs, you could still go for Toi Toi or maybe go for 7 pairs, but honestly, I'm going beyond the scope I want to cover at this point, so let's just leave that at that. So at last, I'll just give you some other easy tips for beginners. When trying to form a hand quickly, it's usually best to discard your honor tiles that you only have 1 of and terminals that you don't have multiple copies of or don't have any other numbers near. Even a pair of a win that's not worth any Yaku to you is probably worth throwing away as well. Those tiles are usually the most difficult to work with. The other thing to pay attention to is to not call a tile for a meld that you already have. If you have 4, 5, 6 character and you have the option to cheat and make the same meld, don't click that button. Also, if you're not sure if you have a Yaku or not, simply do not open your hand. So now you've been inundated with a ludicrous amount of information, you're probably wondering how people play this game so easily. And that's because you can simply play with no thoughts. If you try too hard in this game, you're going to turn into me where I watch someone Tsumo 5 times in the same game, making me wonder why I even bothered to pretend like there's any skill involved. There are just some rounds that you have to throw away and go next. But if anyone watches this video and decides that they want to try and populate the ranked Mahjong ladder on the Aether Data Center, we might be able to bring up the active number of players from 2 to 3. Now let's get out there and get shit on by the cheating AI in Yakuza.